In this video, I want to talk a bit about Baldur's Gate 3. There's been a lot of discussion recently about Last of Us 2, obviously, being not quite what people had hoped for as a sequel in a lot of cases. And there's always expectations around sequels for games. Everyone has their own expectation. Sometimes you reach that expectation, or the developer reaches that expectation or surpasses it, like in the case of Divinity Original Sin 2. Or sometimes they fall just short because the bar is set too high, like games like Dark Souls 2, which I think many people would agree just wasn't quite as where they wanted it to be, what they had envisioned for a sequel to the Dark Souls game. There are obviously a lot of expectations for Baldur's Gate 3. It's probably one of the most anticipated games in a series in a very, very long time. The second game having come out almost 20 years ago. So this is a game that people have been expecting to be made for I don't know how many years. And there is a lot of things people want from the game. And you've seen a lot of discussion already, not something we've covered a tremendous amount on our channel, but about the look of the game. It's very easy to look at the game and see that there are similarities between it and Divinity Original Sin 2. And there's a lot of people that think Baldur's Gate 3 should look differently, just visually or texturally or the style of the game. So I wanted to explore, because of all the discussion around Last of Us 2, just what the expectations are for this game and whether it's going to be able to meet or surpass those, because it's a very, very high bar. I think one of the things that's incredibly interesting about this particular game, when you're talking about expectations, is that Divinity Original Sin 2 was made by Larian Studios, and Baldur's Gate 3 is made by Larian Studios, but Divinity Original Sin 2 was actually inspired heavily by D&D in games like Baldur's Gate. There was a shocking absence of these games in the market. D&D hasn't put out a very good video game in a long time, if you're not talking about an MMO. So there was this huge gap in the market, and Divinity kind of came in and filled that, along with Pillars of Eternity and now Pathfinder Kingmaker. But the game itself was heavily inspired by it. You know, the Larian team plays D&D. They grew up playing D&D. So they made a game that, for all intents and purposes, is somewhat similar to D&D. Not maybe exactly in the way the mechanics are, but in the way the game plays, the amount of freedom you have, and the way you can do things with a lot of freedom. My biggest question about this is that going to hurt Baldur's Gate 3 or help it? I mean, if you are sitting here and you're trying to differentiate Baldur's Gate 3 from Divinity Original Sin 2, or let's say if this game was Divinity Original Sin 3, I don't think anyone's going to complain if this game was Divinity Original Sin 3 that there's so much freedom, so much similarity to Divinity Original Sin 2. But the things that made Divinity Original Sin 2 great, you surely want in Baldur's Gate 3. Right? I mean, you want freedom, you want player agency, you want turn-based combat, if you're a Divinity fan. You want things that they did well from that game to find their way into Baldur's Gate 3. So my question is, how do you differentiate and say, you know, this belongs in Baldur's Gate 3 regardless of whether it was in Divinity Original Sin 2 or not? And it's really incredibly interesting, because I wonder how many people see things in the game and think Divinity Original Sin 2, but if there had been no Divinity Original Sin 2 or no Divinity Original Sin 1, what would they be saying? Would they be complaining about it still, comparing it to Divinity Original Sin 2? Would they be comparing it to something else? Or would they just be happy that it's there? And it's made me really think about, can this game live up to the expectation because the expectation is not attainable? It's quite the paradox, because I think underneath it all, I think most people would agree that Baldur's Gate 3 is shaping up to be a great game. I absolutely think so. I'm excited to play it. And obviously, we're going to get into early access, hopefully in August. So we'll have some idea how the game's going to play, what it's going to feel like, what it's going to look like, how it actually feels from our own perspective. But, you know, in terms of expectations, can they get there? I mean, you know, will a 90 be good enough? Will an 85 be good enough in terms of reviews? What's the expectation for this game? What would you expect a Baldur's Gate 3 game to get 20 years later? I mean, Fallout 3 was reviewed amazingly, and it came out way after Fallout 2. And I wasn't a huge fan of Fallout 3, and there's no way that game met my expectations, or could it meet my expectations. As fair or unfair as that sounds, that was a game I bought and returned and then played again a year later and actually really enjoyed, but that was after I had shelved those expectations. So I wonder if Baldur's Gate 3 is not going to get some of this treatment as well. Now, talking about the early access, at least this game has early access, right? Because if anything, Divinity Original Sin 2 was in early access, if you didn't know, for about a year. So I think it's safe to assume that Baldur's Gate 3 will be in early access for a similar amount of time. It could obviously be shorter or longer. I don't know. I don't have any insider information there. But if you just assume that it's going to be about a year, then that is a lot of time for people to change their expectations. So there's also that factors into it. I mean, your expectations for a game you've never played may be different if you can play the game and then you go, you know what? I'm not sure how I feel about this. Let me play some more and see. And you can play and play and play. And maybe the game makes some changes throughout early access as well, maybe for the better for you, maybe for the worse. But that early access, I think, is going to be key to maybe changing these expectations and bringing around people to a different point of view. I mean, maybe from a marketing standpoint, a demo would be a great idea because in order to play early access, you have to pre-order the game either on PC or Stadia. So again, you have to put up money to find out if this is for you. Maybe a demo would be great. I mean, maybe that's what games should start doing more and more often, adding demos, because then you play and you can make a decision. I mean, let's face it, most people can make a decision about a game, whether it could be for them or not be for them, or whether it's going to be worth the money from playing a game in 2 hours. I mean, is it 100% accurate? No, it's not. It's not 100% accurate. Or maybe the demo's 5 hours. I don't know. But it'll give you some idea. And then maybe when review day comes or launch day comes for a game, the people reviewing it, as far as users are concerned, are all people that knew what they were getting. They knew what they were getting. Maybe the reviews would be better. Maybe the expectations would be what they would be changed, and it would be, well done in that respect. I don't know what the long-term solution for that, but when you look at Baldur's Gate 3, which is surely to be a polarizing game, because of the expectations, I mean, let's just set aside the game for a second. There's the expectations for this game are massive. And I'm just trying to figure out how do you avoid that when you are that company that's making this game with these sort of expectations? Do you change the game to meet the expectations of the fan base, or do you continue on with your vision of the game and carry on regardless and hope it works out for the best? I'm not saying I have the answer here, but they surely have that problem and they have to make decisions about that. And I would be curious to hear what you guys have to say in the comments, because it's a very debatable position. One of the things I really love about Larian, what I respect about them, is they take feedback seriously. They ask for feedback. They want feedback. They are not, insistent upon this is their vision of the game and no one else's point of view matters. I think if they can, they will try and reconcile their vision of the game, Wizards of the Coast's vision of the game, and the community's vision of the game to try and put something together that makes everybody happy. Because at the end of the day, they're making a game that for fans, and I think they will take that into consideration. They've done early access for Divinity Original Sin 1 and 2, and they've changed a lot of things considerably during those early access. So it'll be really interesting to see the game, when it's all said and done, how much it's changed from early access. Perhaps we'll record some gameplay at early access and do a comparison near publication of the game so you guys can see just how much it's changed. But I imagine that they are going to take that feedback very, very seriously. I mean, so what do you guys think? Am I crazy here? Can they actually meet these expectations? I mean, let's say Baldur's Gate 3 launches next year. I don't know what's coming out next year, but to me, if that game doesn't win Game of the Year next year, then it's a disappointment. That's a high fucking bar, man. That is a high fucking bar. It's the same bar that Last of Us 2 had. Can they make that bar? Is it even possible what the expectations are there? What do you guys think?